Ask the Coach 19 with executive coach and business mentor Nick Sellers. How's your week been, Nick?
Good, thank you. Couple of low spots, but nothing that would make me think that the week's been a disaster. It's been good, really. Thank you for asking.
Brilliant. Great to hear. So, Nick, as you know, I've been reflecting on my own career lately, and it's struck me that I'm constantly juggling different aspects of my work. There's some tasks I genuinely love, like connecting with people and building relationships. There are those that I don't mind, like diving into a bit of research and market analysis. And there's some essential tasks that I'm really not fond of, namely admin. Over the past few years, I've came to realise the importance of balancing these different elements if you want to be successful and achieve your goals. So, what I wanted to explore, Nick, really is what advice would you give professionals who are trying to find that balance in their own careers?
I think understanding yourself is really key. So we each of us have things that we are truly passionate about. Things that we really, really enjoy, and hopefully enjoy about the work we do. Then there are things that we're competent, and we can go into some examples of that in a moment. Things that we're good at doing, but I wouldn't necessarily call them a passion. And then there are things that really cause us frustration. And our natural tendency is to avoid the frustrations at all cost, or to squeeze them into a tiny corner of our lives. And I think that's a dangerous thing to do. But we need to understand ourselves is where we start.
Thanks. So, like, how can individuals become more aware of their own preferences in
Right.
general?
Um, I would say that those things that we're passionate about, writing things down. We've talked in the past about reflecting on things. I recommend people keep a journal. Doesn't mean to say it's got to dominate life. Doesn't mean to be something that you do every day. But just actually thinking about things and writing things down just helps us. Identifying those things that we're passionate about, those will be the sort of things that actually we never run out of energy for. Okay. So, for some people it's gardening, for other people it's meeting people in business, doing a deal, whatever. But these are things that, we can do that till, the cows come home, and it doesn't drain us. The things that we're competent at are the things that we scrub up well with. So in my case, I will admit to being an introvert, and I'm quite good at doing presentations. So I can stand up in front of an audience of people and I can present on a topic. It's thing that I'm competent at, but I wouldn't say it's something that I'm passionate about. Um, but I'm good at it. Doesn't mean to say then, because I'm good at it, that I'm passionate about it. And then there's the frustrations of life, and it might be that doing the admin is something that we really just do not enjoy doing. And I noticed, a lot of folks that run their own businesses tend to squeeze all of the business receipts and stuff like that, the invoicing stuff that's got to be done. They go stick it in a carrier bag in the corner of the room and then hand it over to the bookkeeper just as a bag of receipts and invoices that need to be sent out. And then somebody's got to spend time sorting that out. Well, it might be that there's a different way that that self-employed person can deal with that admin in a way that doesn't burden somebody else unnecessarily, and helps them to keep on top of it. So we still need to deal with the frustrations, the things that cause frustration, but we don't need to let them dominate us, and we don't need to avoid them.
One of the realizations I gained, Nick, was with the previous employer. We were given an insights session,
Yeah.
which is essentially, as you know, Nick, a personality assessment, which shows which style of communication and which style of working you have a preference to. And actually, the report gave me a lot of insight in my own personality, and it showed me some of the areas that I'm quite blind to and the areas that I'm weak in that I didn't actually realise. And going forward, I sometimes refer back to it actually, and it was done probably 6, 7 years ago now, potentially a bit longer. I know sometimes if I'm struggling with something in particular, refer back to it.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on things like insights? I know there's other similar tools, Nick. What's your thoughts on them?
Actually, it's a great question. I'm glad that you asked that. I've done insights too. I did it, I think, probably about 20 years ago, and it's been invaluable to me. So I would say anybody that's considering using insights in their business for their senior team, absolutely, I would recommend it. And I know a couple of folks who are accredited practitioners who can help them through that. Um, so insights is really good. Another one that I would recommend people take a look at is the Table Group in the US have developed a model called the Six Working Geniuses,
Mm.
and that is really, really good. Basically, they say that we've each of us, or there exist six working geniuses. We each of them have two working geniuses. We then have two working competencies, and then we have two working frustrations. And just even recognizing which category different things sit in helps us to understand ourselves better. It doesn't mean to say that we avoid the frustrations. It just means that we recognize that things cause us frustration. And it might just be that knowing that the admin causes frustration means that, something rather than punishing yourself with a bag full of receipts and invoicing and trying to plow through it on a Friday afternoon, you might say, something, I'm just going to do 15 minutes of that every day and keep on top of it.
Yeah, that's the next question I was going to ask you next. So, recognizing that not every aspect of our work's going to be enjoyable or is going to be our preference, how do we embrace that? The reality is we need to do these tasks and to try and make them as enjoyable as possible.
Well, I think just that, you and I have talked before, and I've talked about weaknesses. When we know that we have a weakness in our personality, in our character, in our attributes, in our skills, um, we cannot, I think, easily turn a weakness into a strength. So there are those things in life that we're just very good at, come to us naturally, we enjoy doing them. They're strengths, we might say. But a weakness is something that we really don't enjoy. It takes a lot out of us. We might be able to turn that weakness into less of a weakness, but we'll never turn it into a strength. So I think actually just realizing that is halfway to solving the problem. And then a little bit of creative thinking and a little bit of habit forming, we can actually establish habits and routines in life that means that we might say, again, going back to that admin stuff, to use that as a classic example, we might say, something, 8 till 8:15 in the morning, every morning I'm going to grab a coffee, do the admin, and then I don't have to face it at the end of the week.
So, would that be your advice, Nick, to get the tasks that you don't want to do it the way first? Because to be honest, sometimes I'll aim to do that, but if there's something really frustrating that I have to do that I really don't enjoy, it'll sometimes knock me out of kilter for the rest of the day. And then when I try to move on to the more enjoyable and fulfilling activities, I actually struggle and it holds me back for the rest of the day. So I'll then usually say, well, actually, I'll park it till the end of the day, and then it doesn't end up getting done, which is probably the worst scenario. So what's your advice in that regard?
I think we've each of us got to figure out what works for us. We're all different. I've suggested 8 o'clock in the morning. Could be that, another person would say, I'm going to do my day's work. I'm going to go home, have my evening meal, and I'm going to spend the 15 minutes doing the admin there before I settle down to watch the TV or something like that. So we're each of us different, Andrew, but I do think establishing routines and habits is really key. Another thing I would say as well is that where we know that we have a frustration, where we know that there's something that doesn't really work for us, we don't have to beat ourselves up over it and force ourselves to do things. It may be that the task that we don't enjoy doing is actually of a magnitude that it's worth getting help with. So we can kind of outsource it. Is there a colleague that we work with? Is there another member of the family that loves doing admin? That we can just hand those receipts over. And again, rather than burden them with a bag full of receipts at the end of every week, maybe we can just hand over a few things at the end of every day. And, 10 minutes and they've nailed it because they love doing that sort of thing.
Yeah. So when do you know if it's appropriate to outsource tasks, Nick? Is there a trigger that should?
I think it's when it starts to get in the way of you doing what you need to do. And again, going back to this idea that we've got things that we're passionate about and things that we're competent at, we can't exist on a kind of a one track diet. I'm thinking about, so we might like sweet food, but we can't eat entirely sweet food. It's not good for us, and actually, eventually, we will get a bit tired of it. So we've got to eat a balanced diet, and I think that's where, when we talk about um, having a balance across everything, we can't just do the things that we're passionate about the whole time. There will be things that we're competent with, but that we're not passionate about, and there'll be things that frustrate us. Being prepared to do all of them is right for us. So that balanced diet of activity. But where the thing that frustrates us is of a magnitude, or where we actually just can't move the needle. You mentioned doing something that's a bit of a frustration early in the day and it knocks you off for the day. That's to be avoided. So it may be that the decision to outsource or to ask for help with something comes when we know it's affecting us in an adverse way.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like, it's never been probably an easier time to outsource. Even now, outsourcing doesn't necessarily need to be outsourcing it to a person. You can outsource it to a software. Some of the things you're talking about there around bookkeeping.
Yep.
Nowadays, yeah, I must admit, my bookkeeping, I was one of those people exactly that would take a bag of receipts down to the accountant at the end of the year and ask them to sort it out. But through having an app now on my phone, I just take photos of the receipts, they automatically upload, it reads the information and it processes that transaction, which
Yep.
is saving a huge amount of time and effort. And it's something that I dreaded that I just do naturally now. And I think another, like say, admin, I hate to some extent. There's a big research project that was very mundane that I had to do recently, and I outsourced a lot of the admin work on that to somebody else and paid them to do it just because I felt that my time was better spent on other activities that were adding more value to the project, and it worked out really well. So yeah, absolutely agree, Nick. Um, Going back to the crux of it, Nick. Ultimately, though, especially if you're a business owner, you're probably not going to be in the position where you do the fun stuff all day, every day. I think that's you need to scale to a certain size to be able to do that. So, how do you keep yourself motivated though, and keep yourself working towards the bigger goal when you have to accept elements of the day or tasks that you're not going to enjoy?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think when um, this takes us into an area of burnout, around burnout. I think when we are constantly doing stuff that frustrates us, that drains us, I think that is the cause of burnout. I don't think it's just purely being busy leads to burnout. I think it's when we're busy doing things that take it out of us.
Mhm.
And so it's demotivating, it's draining, and it's not good for us. I think to remain motivated, we have to know what the purpose is of doing what we're doing. We've got to have things that we do that we really find kind of just refills the fuel tank for us. It might be that it's actually getting away from work, because we're not just talking about motivation in the workplace, are we? We're talking about motivation in life. And it may be that the workplace is a place where we're competent. It may be a place that's got those frustrations with it, but our real passion in life is a hobby. And so, make sure that we keep up with the thing that maintains a high level of energy. Um, that energy can kind of get used up a little bit on some of the things that are necessary in life that we're competent with, and that we even things that we're frustrated around but need to be done.
Yeah, fantastic point, Nick. Yeah, I think I've said this to you in the past that anytime I've felt like I'm heading towards burnout, it's actually been when things have been quiet, not when things have been busy. Because when I'm busy, I'm energized. I'm speaking to people. I'm meeting with people. I'm doing things that fuel me. It's when things are quiet and I'm having to, send a lot of messages, send a lot of emails, do a lot of research. That drains me, and I can completely see where you're coming from there. That you
Mm.
need those activities, but incidentally, yeah, I think it is surprising that from my personal perspective, the burnout actually comes when things are quiet as opposed to being busy. And I think it's something that people should be very mindful of.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. What, so what, I think you just probably answered my next question, which I was going to ask. I mean, is there times in your career personally where you felt that there's been prolonged periods when you've been in a role maybe that wasn't satisfying, or doing large parts or fairly substantial parts that fed your soul, where you've started to feel disillusioned with the role, or you've been doing tasks that didn't suit you, and you've just had to push through them? Has there been any times in your career, Nick, that you've had?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And when those excuse me, when those periods arrive, it may be on the back of a period of working on something which causes for me frustration or anxiety. And yeah, you kind of push ahead, but the truth is that you need to get either past it or work around it. And it's kind of a vague way of describing what I mean. Um, we can't just keep pushing at a door that's wedged on the other side. If something is really a total frustration for us, something's got to change. We need to get somebody else involved who can help us get that door kind of pushed open a bit further, so we can progress where we need to progress, or we need to get them to take it over completely, so that we don't end up kind of dwelling in a place which is just really a bad place for us to be. And so for me, there have been several times when I've been working on things that I just couldn't make headway with. And so I ended up going back to my line manager, or going to somebody else, a colleague, and seeking help. And when we seek help, that's not an admission of weakness or failure. Seeking help actually is identifying that this isn't reflecting well on you or on the task that you've been given to do.
Yeah, I think I don't know, Nick, if you come across this with any of the business leaders that you coach, but I think a real key thing of management and leadership is to be able to identify the areas that individuals in your team enjoy and the areas that they don't enjoy, and try and give them tasks and projects, and a focus on those areas. And I think there's been times when I've maybe worked with managers that haven't recognised the areas that I've enjoyed and have made. For example, was one manager I worked for, very heavy reporting duties, so he'd
Mm.
make me fill in very extensive Excel spreadsheet, which would literally take me one day a week. I hated it, and I hated the job because of it, ultimately, because every Friday I knew I would have to spend a day doing intensive admin that I didn't see the value in, but to him it was very important, and it was a task that I knew he would enjoy doing. Do you ever come across that, Nick, where maybe business leaders or managers are blindsided by not aligning their team's goals to the personal preferences?
Yeah, I think, and this brings me back to this working geniuses instrument I was talking about, the model. It's really important that a team is made up of people with the right balance of those kind of working geniuses. So where you've got something that, like an Excel workbook that needs to be updated regularly, that would require somebody who's comfortable doing that, to keep right on top of it, and it doesn't drain them. Whereas what you've just described is that you maintaining that was something that you didn't enjoy, you didn't look forward to, and probably it took it out of you as a result of that. But it's still important to the boss. But maybe there was a way that, I don't know, you might have found somebody else you could work with who could maybe automate part of it, or maybe you could have automated part of it, or somebody else that actually didn't mind that kind of work, and you could swap tasks, and maybe there was a part of the job that they were doing that actually you were much better suited to do as a working competence, or even as a working genius. So I think in teams we need to recognize that we can't have a team that doesn't have balance in it. With the right balance, that team will really move ahead.
Another thing as well, Nick, I don't know if you've noticed this in various settings throughout your career or with some of the people you coached. I think there's often an assumption that certain roles will come with a certain personality type, and maybe that's true to an extent, but you'd always assume, someone who works in sales, very extrovert, very outgoing. I don't always think that's the case. I actually think some introverts make very good salespeople. And likewise, if you analytical roles, you would always suspect it would be somebody who was quite introverted. And I don't think that's always the case. And I do think organisations need to be careful when they're building out a team of, finance professionals. Within that, there's going to be lots of subsets of personalities and preferences.
Yeah.
I mean, has there been people or roles that have taken you by surprise in your career, Nick, that maybe wouldn't align to the stereotypical personality?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned there, sales. I know some excellent salespeople who are introvert and very quiet as a result of being introvert, and yet they just they just have such a knack of creating a relationship with somebody who's a buyer, and they're incredibly successful in their sales career. But I also know of salespeople who are wildly extrovert and who can galvanize a room of prospective buyers to actually queue up and sign the contract. So I think you're right. You're absolutely right. We do well not to try and put certain personality types into buckets and say that person is going to be an outstanding salesperson because they're an extrovert. Maybe we need to actually start looking at things like what things do people feel comfortable working on, because that way they're going to stay around longer. Somebody that's in a job that just causes them total frustration, that just doesn't do anything to feed their soul, let's say, unless they've got something else in life that's feeding their soul, they're not going to stay around too long.
It's true. It's probably an area of diversity that gets overlooked a lot of the time. I think like there's
Yeah,
obviously talk of
I think
diversity in
so.
lots of different areas, but diversity of personalities, I think, is if you're all working towards the same common mission and goal, a diversity of personalities is probably a powerful tool within an organisation. I don't. Would you agree, Nick? Or
Yeah, no, I do. I don't think we can afford to have everybody having the same personality type. We need that diversity, but we also need to understand that diversity better. Just because we don't get on with a person, it probably means we don't understand too much about them. And when we understood more about how they see life, how they approach the job, then we'll start to understand whether or not they're in the ideal job, and whether there's a way that we can maybe change our style. That's where the insight stuff that you mentioned earlier is key. I learned such a lot about different personality styles, about different approaches, that for me, it just completely revolutionized the way I communicated with other people.
there's a book, Nick. I don't know if you've read it. It's based on insights called "Surrounded by Idiots." And I read it after the Insights training. It's been a few years now, but ultimately the realization is that nobody else is the idiot. Really, it's not you, but it's you who's the idiot because it's just not taking into account other people's perspectives and preferences. And once you start to see those, you don't become the idiot, whatever the opposite of an idiot is. And so I thought it's a fantastic book, and I'd recommend anybody to read it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think these approaches to things. I think it's you know research, acquiring knowledge, really, really important for us to start to understand things better. But, it's not just about the research and the acquiring of knowledge, it's about reflecting and understanding, putting things into place, and then using them to our advantage, certainly, but also to the advantage of everybody around us. It means that we sort of start to take the stress and the friction out of situations. We start to become calmer, more at peace, more able to actually take steps forward rather than be held back.
yeah, yeah. I remember I worked for a guy. Like this may be just a strange anecdote, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So I worked for a guy, and I was quite early in my career. I was working abroad, and he'd hired a few people at the same time, and nobody was doing exactly as he told them to do and following his way of doing things. And he joked, but he wasn't joking, that he was going to hire from the armed forces because they would know how to follow orders going forward. And ultimately, the business wasn't successful and it did close down. And nobody stayed working for him for very long. But I think he's probably someone who could have done with that book, uh, surrounded by idiots and maybe reflecting more on himself. But I think, what do you think? Like outside of maybe the military, where you need that hierarchy and being able to follow orders, it just doesn't work in the business world, does it?
Well, I think what sounds there as though maybe where he failed, if failure is the right word, is it sounds as though he didn't actually explain why doing things his way was important. And therein maybe lies the problem, that when we tell somebody to do something, very often people want to know why. Why am I doing it that way? Why is that important? And I think as a business leader working with people, if we can explain the why, that's important, why it's important to do it this particular way, then actually I think people find it easier to get behind it and do it. I don't know. You tell me. Was that something that you experienced? Was he good at explaining why?
No, no, I think if you asked why, he would say it's not your job to ask me why. It's your job just to
Right.
do what I tell you. And I think that might work at a certain stage in your career, but I think once you've got a bit of experience under your belt, you're within your rights to challenge and to question
Yeah.
leadership to a certain extent. And if you go about it the right way, I believe.
I think you mentioned the armed forces. I'd kind of reflect on that. I've never been in the armed forces, but I can understand that Army, Navy, Air Force, when an order is given, the last thing you want when you're actually facing the enemy is for somebody to start debating the point. You need to act as a unit and move forward, to do what has been decided. That kind of opportunity for reflection and debate and stuff is not the sort of thing that you want to have in kind of open warfare. But in business, there's always an opportunity to talk about why we're doing something. Is it the best approach? Could we do it a better way? And I think that's how businesses truly grow and improve what they do.
Yeah, I think your point on the military's fair. I know of a few military officers or ex-officers, and to be fair, Nick, they are encouraged to allow their teams to challenge them. But like you say, there's a time and a place, and they are
Yeah.
absolutely encouraged if they make a decision to be challenged on it by members of their team, but not in the heat of battle. For example, they're expected to follow orders. So I think the problem was, what the chap was mentioning, giving the example of, he was never really wanted to be challenged in any situation, and I think that's where, like you alluded to, there's a loss of faith in leadership if they can't explain why they're doing things.
It's not confidence, is it? He's not confident in his own ability, and he's not confident in his team's ability if he can't enter into a conversation about things. You've already described there was an unfortunate outcome. Things didn't progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, interesting topic, Nick. Again, we could talk about it all day, and it's great to get your insight and some advice on how to continue doing tasks that you maybe don't enjoy, or like you say, potentially outsource them. Um, and yeah, really appreciate taking the time to join again, Nick, and hopefully you'll join me again next week.
Absolutely, Andrew. Love these conversations. Really enjoy them. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Bye.